When hardened criminals repeatedly evade justice, elite police units come together to crack these toughest cases.
Oh, police officers!
My role is investigating serious and organised crime.
We are a covert investigative team.
For the first time across the UK, we have exclusive access to the investigations of Britain's most talented detectives.
We'll spend years putting together all of these tiny pieces of evidence.
The most bizarre investigation I've been involved in.
And share the methods and evidence that can bring these criminals to book.
Handguns coming in from the United States.
He had the drugs.
That is a lot of money.
A real whodunit.
This time, in Gloucestershire, a dangerous gang dealing drugs and guns from other counties.
They found a shotgun in the boot.
Our concern then is what other firearms could he have access to?
A fraudster stealing hundreds of thousands while living the high life.
Yo, Justin Harrods, man, nice braid, son.
Viva valued these claims that they paid out in the region of about £200,000, and they were starting to realise that this was one big fraud.
And a heartless group buying and selling Britain's wild birds for profit.
I was receiving a phone call from one of my colleagues that there is an aviary that's massive, that is chock-a-block full of wild captured goldfinches.
I thoroughly enjoy investigative work. It's organised criminality that I've been involved in now for probably the last 10 to 12 years. It's that serious and organised crime, gang networks, it's that world.
In Gloucestershire between 2020 and 2021, there were over 1,600 drugs offences recorded, more than 4 a day.
There's organised criminals here in Gloucestershire in the same as any other town or county, maybe not the same level as the likes of London and Manchester, but we still have proper serious criminals.
One criminal whose name kept cropping up more and more was local drug dealer Lee Fisher.
He's lived in Dursley all his life. Our view at that time from a drugs intelligence perspective was that he was involved with his brothers, with his family, and with people he'd grown up with. It was a very sort of close-knit community. Dursley is a very small town. Yes, I'd heard of Lee Fisher. My view originally was big fish, little pond. The intelligence came in was saying that Lee Fisher was the biggest drug dealer in the area. Lee Fisher was involved in violent feuds. Lee Fisher was involved in the supply and the movement of firearms. It was then that we suddenly realised that actually the criminality here is higher than perhaps we thought was the case before.
Concerned about the reports of the local drug dealer expanding his empire and using more menacing tactics, Chief Inspector Fletcher decided to set up a dedicated team to tackle the problem.
I'm the leader of the team. It's just my responsibility really to bring those people together, highlight their specialisms and bring the best out of everybody. And then I have an evidential team led by Matt.
Whether you're part of the surveillance team or part of the investigation team, there's a real mix. Sometimes you just need patience because we work to the timetable that the criminals set.
Dan is probably the most tenacious investigator that I've known in my 24 years in the job.
I've built up quite a good understanding of how drug supply works within our country and the technicalities, if you like, around police investigations in terms of that type of crime.
In February 2018, they launched Operation Glamorgan.
It's really important to try to get as much information as you can about a person that's under investigation. Really want to kind of live their life with them so you know where they're going, you know where they've been, and that's what we set out to achieve with the surveillance.
And watching the gang's movements soon paid off.
And this is when we first saw his links to Liverpool. It was quite clear that Lee Fisher was tied into what are some quite serious criminals in the Merseyside area. And we started looking at his phones. We suspect something is happening because of all the activity that's gone on before, all the communications that have occurred, but we're not quite sure what.
One of his associates that he was linked to, their vehicle began travelling to Liverpool, and so a surveillance team was scrambled to work behind that car and see what happened when that vehicle travelled to Liverpool.
We're utilising Merseyside because we're going into areas of Liverpool that are sort of deemed to be quite a hotspot for policing activity.
And it's a very challenging time for the surveillance team because they're working behind people they don't know that well. We got a lot of help from Merseyside police as our team arrived into Liverpool.
But although the team identified other gang members, one man was nowhere to be seen.
We were aware that Lee Fisher was flying out of the country to Belfast. It's a relatively common sort of method that some criminals look to do is when they're carrying out criminality. And ultimately, they may change the way they're operating or they may leave the country.
Whilst their main target was out of reach, for now, the police team doubled down on the rest of the gang.
They were able to see an interaction with another person. Something was placed into the back of the car, but we weren't able to say what that was at the time.
Followed them as they've gone back out of the city, and it's obvious now they're coming back to Gloucestershire. So I've asked Merseyside police to stop the car, suspecting that there's something in the boot of that vehicle, and I want to know what it is.
They eventually found a shotgun in the boot, and then the occupants of the car were arrested and taken into custody in Liverpool.
Our concern then is, well, what else can he get, and what other firearms could he have access to if he wanted to through his contacts in Liverpool?
When the team examined the guns seized from the boot, it became clear the gang were a bigger threat than they thought. But disappointingly, they found no evidence of drug dealing and the gun courier didn't talk.
It's going to be easy to discharge, easy to get ammunition for, and it's something that can cause some serious injury or death.
If they're asking for money or their debt paid back and they're pointing that at you, you're going to pay, aren't you?
They may have found a gun, but they were still struggling to connect Lee Fisher with any crime.
When his associate was arrested and his phone was seized, there was quite a lot of messages between him and Lee Fisher where Lee was asking for things to be speeded up because he needed the thing back in Gloucestershire. So we started to bank some really nice evidence early on, but we still needed to continue the investigation to see what other criminality Lee Fisher was engaged in.
The team continued to watch the gang members' every move.
On the 5th of June, surveillance officers captured what turned out to be an important meeting.
One of the people we'd identified working for Fisher was a chap called Stephen West, and we believed that he was a drugs courier or a drug supplier working on behalf of Lee Fisher.
Stephen West was a trusted member of the gang, and police had followed him to a fast food restaurant where they believed he was meeting with a courier from another organised crime group.
We saw the courier drive in, Stephen West walk across the car park, meet up with the courier, jump into the car and then come back out again, and there's a potential exchange of bags that has occurred, identifying potentially a route of some of those drugs coming into Fisher's enterprise.
The team thought they had evidence of the drugs route, but with no drugs or sign of the main man Lee Fisher, they couldn't risk going in too soon.
There's always a risk whenever you execute a warrant that it may tip the hand to the person you're looking at. They may change the way they're operating, or they may leave the country, etc., or leave the county. But it's a risk that you have to balance up and understand. And if you're being frustrated, then sometimes that's what you need to do.
And they decided to take a risk after watching an address in town.
We saw Lee Fisher go there on a number of occasions. We saw Stephen West go there on certain key dates when he then went on to meet one of the suppliers.
I arranged for my intel team to obtain a warrant for that address, and on the 22nd of June we go to that address and execute that warrant.
But unfortunately, there wasn't the large amount of drugs that we were anticipating might be present.
We also identify a number of weapons that are stored there that aren't criminal offences per se, but it does give us the penchant for what people are carrying around with them.
However, we did seize a number of quite important items such as scales, wrappings and things that show that drugs have been prepared there, and also importantly we seized 1 or 2 key mobile phones. But over the next couple of weeks, once the phones seized were downloaded and we started to understand what had taken place there, we knew that it was an important part of the investigation and it would give us some good information about Lee Fisher particularly, and some of the messages on the phones about how he was able to source drugs and sell it to others.
They stepped up surveillance on the gang, and in particular Lee's brother, Daniel Fisher.
On the 2nd of July, officers observed Daniel Fisher travelling to an address in Gloucester Road in Stonehouse, which is where Stephen West lived.
They moved in and out of the house on a number of occasions. It's my belief that he's potentially picked up items from that address. I give the instruction to say that I want Danny Fisher detained and searched, and he stopped on the street outside his car, and he's found to be in possession of a quantity of drugs and mobile phones. So he gets arrested, and at the same time, because we've arrested Danny Fisher, I give the instruction as well that we're going to go in and execute the warrant that we've already got for Stephen West's home.
Sadly, probably the best thing we found there was 2 empty kilogram block wrappings. So cocaine's packaged in a very particular way, and it's quite obvious what they were. But again, we were slightly frustrated that the timing wasn't quite right and we hadn't seized the drugs.
At first sight, the raid again didn't seem to have surfaced much, but what they thought was an innocuous piece of paper turned out to be a key breakthrough, a dealer's list.
Really importantly, some dealer lists were seized, which basically was their written record of all the people they'd been interacting with over the previous months.
That was gold dust. It was an absolutely brilliant piece of evidence. Look at the figures so that we could understand the money that was coming through. Once you understand the money, you then understand the amount of drugs. What we were able to do was look at those people that we suspected were involved in the group, match up their initials, because it wasn't that hard. Many of the initials, well, all of them, I think, matched the people that we were looking at. I can't really put into words how important that piece of paper was in terms of the investigation.
The police now had strong evidence to implicate the lower members of the gang, but not enough on the boss, Lee Fisher, who had become evasive.
He left Gloucestershire because at that point in time he felt that the police activity had got too much, so he needed to start to distance himself. Mobile phones are great, you don't have to be in the area to be involved in what's going on. You can go and live somewhere else and still orchestrate.
But only 5 weeks later, Lee resurfaced. And ironically, it looked like the police's best chance of implicating him would be through his dealings with a different gang.
On the 16th of August, Lee Fisher had been shown through all these events to be communicating with someone who was quite a significant drug supplier in Gloucester.
They did everything they could to prevent us from seeing the meeting.
This is a meeting of minds. This is a meeting of the heads of the 2 OCGs.
There was one piece of the evidence jigsaw that remained to be filled.
On paper, we had quite a strong case, but where we were lacking it was a significant seizure of drugs. As the surveillance continued on the 16th of September, a further important event took place where a number of people were seen to come together in a small village pub in one of the villages on the outskirts of between Stroud and Dursley. And Lee Fisher was seen to meet with somebody called Mark Bainbridge, who was potentially a customer of his. One of the perks of the job is to go and sit in the pub and try and listen to the conversation or understand what they're doing. I could see phone calls being made by the key people in terms, and then they went outside for a meeting. Lee Fisher was calling the head of this organised crime group and vouching for Mark Bainbridge as a customer and setting up a meeting between Mark Bainbridge and one of the head of this organised crime group suppliers later on that day.
The surveillance team continued to watch Mark Bainbridge as he travelled to a small village called Leonard Stanley,
which we knew from experience was a meeting place where the people supplying it quite like to meet customers to supply drugs.
So again, we are able to capture the exchange that takes place.
One of the really great things for me that we saw at that point was that the footage showed that Mark Bainbridge had a big lump of something white in his pocket, basically. You could see it. It tends to be on a drug deal, you'll see people come in nice and slow and they'll have a look around, you know, they make sure the coast's clear, and then when they get the stuff, they're like, and they're off.
I've made a decision that we're going to look to put an intervention in on this point.
And then a short time later, that car was halted by uniformed colleagues, and he was found to have a quarter kilo of drugs in his possession. We knew that was going to be the final piece of the puzzle to really strengthen the case. We had so many pages and pages of call data and surveillance evidence that we just needed something to prove to a court exactly what they were talking about or phoning each other about, or what those meetings were about.
This particular day was really important because it showed the quantity of the drugs that Matthew Cornwall was supplying, and it also showed the quantity of the drugs that were going into the Lee Fisher organisation.
Lee was arrested in Dursley, just not far from his home address, and he was brought into custody for, while searches took place at a lot of other addresses. So in total, 13 people were arrested and charged.
Stephen West pleaded guilty to conspiracy to supply cocaine and was sentenced to 6 years and 9 months. Daniel Fisher was charged with conspiracy to supply cocaine and sentenced to 5 years. Mark Bainbridge received a sentence of 4 years and 4 months. The gang boss, Lee Fisher, was charged with 2 counts of conspiracy to supply cocaine and sentenced to 6 years and 9 months in prison.
It felt fantastic that we've got him. He's been prosecuted and he's now at Her Majesty's pleasure.
Crash for cash is a scam which sees fraudsters invent or deliberately cause road traffic collisions. It costs £336 million every year and increases the cost of all drivers' premiums. This type of fraud is big business, and in 2018, there were 58,000 fake claims involving cars, worth over £605 million.
I joined police at the age of 16, straight out of school. I was a police cadet, and then joined the regulars at 18. I worked within the Insurance Fraud Enforcement Department with the City of London Police as a detective sergeant running an investigations team dealing with insurance fraud. The sense of it being a victimless crime isn't the case, actually. There's a lot of victims behind fraud, and also it's a very hard crime to detect because people can hide behind electronic devices, mobile phones, computers, that type of thing.
Sergeant Hussey's unit is responsible for 580 convictions at court, resulting in over 300 years of prison time.
We deal with all types of different insurance frauds, whether that's crash for cash, doctors, dodgy solicitors, to basic claims fraud.
When the unit received a tip-off from the Ministry of Justice about a crash for cash scam worth £200,000, they decided to set up Operation Sabic to find out who was behind it.
A solicitor had reported fraud in that they'd been receiving a number of referrals that had come through that were fictitious road traffic collisions, and highlighting to us that this was a fraud and needed investigating.
But when the team investigated further, they found that not only were the fraudsters making money on false referrals, they were making staggering sums from the insurance companies by taking out policies in fake names and making false claims for crashes that never happened.
We were provided with the details of one particular claim, and our internal checks then established a link to over 60 policies and over 40 claims.
Aviva valued these claims that they paid out in the region of about £200,000, and they were starting to realise that this was one big fraud.
In this scam, what the suspects were doing was setting up fraudulent bank accounts with either stolen or entirely fictitious IDs. They would then use those to apply for a policy with Aviva. Very shortly after taking out the policy, we would then receive a phone call notifying us of a claim from one of the suspects pretending to be the policy holder, our customer, saying that they'd caused an accident. We would then be contacted by the third party, and that would either be one of the other suspects or even just the same suspect pretending to be somebody else, and they would say that they were injured and bring a bodily injury claim, personal injury claim.
And to support that, they would use photographs of vehicles, which were generally just found on the internet, really, and just doctored.
The details of that vehicle would match the details of the vehicle for the policy, and so we would always then pay a claim in good faith.
Both teams had their work cut out to try and find out who was behind the fraudulent claims.
We looked at money flows, looked at telephone numbers, emails, that type of thing, and where this was all registered to. And then we come up with a common suspect, someone that we'd previously dealt with.
The man they had in mind had been sent to jail in 2013 for a similar scam, using scrapped cars to take bogus payouts from insurers.
We knew that they were a professional boxer, portrayed themselves to be a real pillar within their local community in providing sort of boxing services. You know, we knew that we were dealing with someone that is quite skilled at controlled violence. So, you know, this was a big factor when we're planning this operation to make sure we get it right.
And instead of keeping a low profile, the convicted fraudster was featured boxing on the television. He also ran his own YouTube channel with over 40 self-promoting videos encouraging young people to be like him.
I want my young generation in Afghanistan to be better than me and good as me, you know.
Using his past to evoke empathy and support.
Because it was a war back in Afghanistan and Kabul, so my dad decided to send me to England for a better life. I probably was about 11 years old.
The main suspect of the scam was spending his money on extravagant holidays, on high fashion, on extremely expensive motor vehicles, living well beyond his apparent means.
So our main subjects led a very lavish lifestyle. They loved their fast cars, they liked their holidays. In effect, they owned a property abroad. So this criminality was basically funding their lavish lifestyle.
Ladies and gents, the mighty RX-7 is about to go out.
And one of the ostentatious vehicles he flaunted online was a custom-built, bright pink sports car.
You know, Justin Harrods, man, nice brace, so let's see what's going on.
There was quite a funny photograph that was recovered in the first investigation where there's a picture of our subject just surrounded with his dog and £50 notes.
The suspect, Hamid Siddiqui, had no way to account for his playboy lifestyle, and he seemed to think he was untouchable.
We go hard or we go home. Let's go, baby. If anyone comes my way, I'm gonna knock him out. Boom.
The team had nowhere near enough evidence to go to court. Their only option was to attempt a search of properties connected with Hamid.
We'd conducted 2 searches, which was negative, so we was quite unhappy. We then come across some other information as to another address where he potentially would be, which was a shop premises in northwest London. It was a little bit strange, really, because all the other premises were, you know, greengrocers, newsagents, bakeries, cafes, that type of thing. And there was this one premises that had blackened out windows, like mirrored glass. We kept knocking and still no reply. There was a slight little tear in the mirrored glass. So as we were looking through the glass, we saw our main subject hiding behind the desk. And eventually, I think he weighed up his options and realised actually the game was up, and he came and opened the front door. At the rear of the shop was like living accommodation. It was just a single bed and a small kitchen. But within that area, we found things like bank cards in different people's names. We found mobile phones, stolen identities, and it turned out that a lot of this information was linked to our case.
Incredibly, we found this main suspect to have a conservative estimate of over 100 aliases. Practically, that would mean that he would have to have fake ID or stolen IDs, different telephone numbers or contact numbers or a number of them, and understand which one was related to which alias.
The team had uncovered an incredibly complex web of lies, but not the critical evidence they needed. And it looked like it had been destroyed.
We've got special equipment that can recover deleted data, for instance, and from that we realised quite quickly there was evidence on there to suggest that he was making up claims with Aviva, instructing other people on what to say.
It was the breakthrough the team needed. And in another surprising twist, they discovered Hamid had recruited his own girlfriend into the crime.
From listening to conversations on the call recordings and listening to the main subject's partner, we knew that it was her. So we then started to build a case around her, looking at obviously her involvement, and we recovered mobile phones that when downloaded we realised that actually she knew exactly what was going on, as she was receiving instructions from her partner as to what to say, what to do in relation to these claims.
After an exhaustive year of collating and gathering evidence, the team had cracked the case. At court, the defendants pleaded guilty. Siddiqui's 32-year-old girlfriend received an 11-month suspended sentence. For masterminding such an elaborate scam, Hamid Siddiqui himself was sentenced to 4 years in prison. The police are now looking to recover funds that were illegally obtained under the Proceeds of Crime Act.
The suspect was extremely overconfident in his criminal ability. That led to greed, and ultimately that led to his downfall.
Each year, the illegal sale of endangered species is worth around £15 billion globally. A recent study revealed that in the past 50 years, Britain has lost 38 million birds from its skies, mainly due to intensive farming methods. Illegal traders in the UK sell wild birds for between £50 and £120, depending on their colouring and birdsong.
I've got nearly 25 years of policing experience. My current role is to lead a very wide, diverse range of operational teams. The Wildlife Crime Unit, which is a unit of specialist, highly trained detectives with a research analytical capability. Over the last 12 months, we have investigated just under 500 wildlife crime-related matters, and this has translated into about 150 allegations of crime. When you look at the added complexities of wildlife crime, not only do you have the associated criminality, and unfortunately, this is obviously leading globally to certain species becoming nearly extinct, and it has a real impact on the communities where they survive and rely upon these species and their existence. Within the team, we have a number of highly specialist detectives. Tara is one of our finest detectives, and back in 2018, she championed what was obviously a very unique case.
I've got 30 years experience. I've worked in lots of different departments, both uniform and plain clothes, and I now work in the wonderful world of the Wildlife Crime Unit.
We work very closely with what are referred to as borough wildlife crime officers. So these are officers on the front line.
I work for a department within the RSPCA called the Special Operations Unit. It's a plainclothes division of the inspectorate. We investigate organised animal crime. So that tends to be anything that is either financially driven or is gang related, such as dog fighting, badger digging, puppy dealing is a big area of our work, and in amongst that is the trading wild birds.
At the start of 2018, Operation Savannah was launched to investigate a gang behind the illegal trapping and selling of wild birds in the southeast of England.
The information was that this East London pub, the Bell in Leytonstone, was as regular as clockwork, so every weekend was having a bird club. This was an opportunity for men from roughly about the age of 18 to the age of 80, attending on a regular basis, meeting up there. There was even a poster that was put at the front door of the pub on a Saturday morning advertising Bird Club, £3. Someone's had to do that. They're making money on the door, obviously not conducive for a pub to be open and running. This was a private affair that was arranged.
To trade a British bird in this country, it has to have a ring on its leg. So it has to be shown to be bred in captivity. What you can't do is catch a bird from the wild and then sell it. The most inhumane way that they will trap birds is called liming, the use of a non-setting glue. So things like rat glue, people can buy it for pest control. They'll smear this glue on things like forestry wire, so thin wires that are quite rigid, and then stick them in the ground surrounded by feed. And then they'll have a decoy bird in a separate cage, which then attracts the birds down. So when the birds land to feed, they get these wires stuck to their feathers, which stops them taking off. And then the trapper will come and just scoop the birds up.
Another common method to catch wild birds is to use a small wooden cage trap.
This is a standard single cage trap. You can see it's wooden wire. You see this is the lid with a spring on it. This is the actual trap trigger. What they'll do is set that against the back of the trap, and that's the trap now set. As the birds come in and land on the trap, it gets triggered.
To attract the birds, seeds are placed next to a decoy bird, which is held in place with a hook.
You put the bird down, you tether it to another small post, and then the bird would attract other birds' attention by trying to fly away, but unable to, but yet still tethered to the ground.
The main injuries to the bird will be, once the bird's inside, what it'll do is it'll beat itself against these bars because it's under stress all the time. So you're going to be getting damage to the primary feathers as well as its head when it's trying to squeeze through the bars. Trying to develop intelligence around this area is a challenge because the people involved in this activity, they won't give us any information. As the operation developed, we realised that we needed to expand it out away from the pub. At least 3 of the people attending we'd had previous prosecutions with.
Some of them that were named already had previous convictions in relation to animal cruelty, but mainly around offences relating to birds and the capture of wild birds. The additional evidence was allowing us to confirm who was actively involved, who we felt were the ringleaders, and make sure that the evidence was sufficient for a judge to grant us warrants for the pub and 3 other addresses.
But as the investigation got underway, more challenges appeared for the team.
The 3 addresses that were of interest to us, they were Essex area, so they were past our borders. So we also had the problems of making sure we had suitable support from other constabularies and making sure that our teams were able to deal suitably at those 3 addresses at the same time that we were entering the Bell pub.
We couldn't do one after the other because we couldn't afford for somebody to tip somebody off, the evidence being got rid of. We had to develop the information to make it actionable so that we knew when the optimum time was to strike at the pub, and that took a number of weeks. Where the pub was situated is on a really busy high street in London. You've got shops at the side of it, shops across the road, traffic on the road, people coming and going, extremely busy. But equally what we didn't know was how organised the event was. Did they have people outside watching to see if there was anybody on the street? Were they clocking any strangers coming in?
After meticulous planning, on the 2nd of February 2019, the Wildlife Crime Unit, together with the RSPCA and the Metropolitan Police, raided 4 addresses.
Fantastic day to do it. The Bell pub was absolutely heaving.
I can't say I've ever followed a police raid into a pub, which was unusual. You wouldn't expect this sort of activity to be happening in a pub. They were serving food, and you've got all these people walking past you with birds, just going into the beer garden. Police had gone in. Anybody who was holding a bird or stood near a bird moved away. And in some cases, throw the birds over the fence because they knew straight away that what they had in their possession was illegal and they didn't want to be seen near that bird.
I was receiving a phone call from one of my colleagues that was going to me, there is an aviary at my address that is full of goldfinches. And I kept saying, are you winding me up? Are you having a joke? This isn't funny. We're really, really busy here. No, I'm not. I'm really not. Are you sure? There is an aviary that's massive, that is chock-a-block full of wild captured goldfinches.
So mostly goldfinches. I've seen one exotic finch, which is up here in this top corner somewhere.
What you had in that location was someone who'd basically devoted their whole premises to the keeping and storing of birds. You know, it was an immense setup, and I've done many bird trapping jobs, but never on that scale.
You can see inside this bag, which was hanging on the window, that there is a single goldfinch. The bird is completely in darkness inside this bag. I believe this process is used to keep the birds calm, in my experience.
The money he'd spent on setting up the cages just shows how many birds were passing through his hands. He was trading birds on an industrial scale. That's not something that you would see regularly. He was one of the main players behind the pub.
DC Tara Wilson was facing another problem: establishing who was a legitimate pub customer and who was there to illegally trade wild birds.
There were numerous cameras which recorded the actions of the day, but that camera had been running for weeks before, so the continuity was there for previous bird clubs. So, you know, none of them could say, oh, I actually just went there and looked that day and I wasn't too sure what it was about. Well, no, because you've actually been seen on this day and this day and this day.
The CCTV at the pub was significant to show that man A walked in that pub with a cage under his arm and he placed it on a table in the beer garden. He was then found stood 8 feet away from it by the police, and denied any knowledge of it. However, what we could show was that he walked in the pub with that cage under his arm, and that cage contained a wild goldfinch.
During the raids, more than 270 birds were seized from the 4 separate addresses. Inside the pub, the police found 40 cages containing goldfinches, linnets and siskins, as well as 27 canaries and mules. 190 wild birds were found at the home address in Southend-on-Sea.
I would love to do something like this again, although exhausting, very, very worthwhile. But the RSPCA said it was the biggest ever capture of wild British birds, and they were absolutely delighted at how well we worked together and the result on that day and subsequently, and the court results.
Operation Savannah prosecuted 17 people for various offences related to the keeping and possession of wild-caught birds. 3 offenders were disqualified from keeping birds for life, and the rest were fined. The mastermind behind the Bird Club was sentenced to 6 months in prison, suspended for 2 years. He was also ordered to pay £28,000 in costs.
It sends absolutely a clear message to these sort of people that their activities aren't tolerated. It's not acceptable. The public won't accept it, let alone the courts.